What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Geek Pantheon. I am Eric, and today I have an exciting review for you all. Fantasy Age from Green Ronin Games is coming out with the second edition of the core rulebook for their Fantasy Age system. Now, a couple of disclaimers up front about the video. First off, big thank you to Green Ronin for sending me a copy of the book for review purposes. They did provide me with the book, but there's no expectation that I'm going to be overly positive or anything like that. So that's just a disclaimer for the video. Additionally, I have read the core rulebook of Fantasy Age First Edition. I have played the Dragon Age tabletop role-playing game, which is what eventually morphed into Fantasy Age. And additionally, I have watched an actual play of Titan's Grave many years ago that also uses the age system. So all those disclaimers out of the way, just to say that I have played a version of this game, but I have not gotten this book on the table yet with the second edition iteration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to approach this review as though you are in the same position I am. You've never played Fantasy Age. This is a brand new system for you. Should this be something that you check out? And then additionally, I will get into the big changes from first edition to second edition. So those of you that are coming to this video because you're big fans of the Fantasy Age system and you want to know what to expect coming into the new book, I'll give you some ideas of the changes that they made. I'm not claiming to cover all the changes because I don't know all of the changes based on my read through of the second edition, but I will cover my highlights and the things I'm really excited about when I think about the concept of playing this game. First and foremost, and where most of you are going to bounce right off this system, it's a 3d6 system, not a d20 system. Wait, don't go. Yes, the system uses 3d6 in this configuration with 2 of one color and 1 of another. Stop looking at my face camera so you can see the dice. There you go. So this system uses something called stunt points, which you might be familiar with. I might be jogging some memories now for those of you that have heard about this system but maybe didn't keep up with it, where you roll 3d6 for any skill check, attack roll. Anytime you would roll a d20 in Pathfinder or D&D 5th edition, you roll 3d6, and if you roll doubles, then you generate stunt points based off of the number that's on the odd colored die. And then one of the updates with the second edition version of the game system is that they've expanded the stunt system a bit to have stunts specific for various situations. Like we have stunts for magic and stunts for the different classes. And then we have just a general stunts table this time around. They've greatly expanded that system. And stunt points are a system to where when you succeed on an ability check and you roll doubles, you're generating stunt points to do bigger and better things with your turn. It's an expanded crit system because obviously if you were to roll max on 3d6, you're rolling 3 6s for an 18, which would qualify for the best possible outcome with the stunt system, with there being a 6 on your stunt die, if I could find it. There we go. But you have more opportunities to do this because if you roll double 1s and a 6 on this die, you're still generating 6 stunt points. So it's a bit more robust than just your standard did you roll a d20. And then one aspect of the system that I have heard from game masters that have run this system that can be a little bit cumbersome for those of you that are bringing new players to the table for the system is if I generate 6 stunt points, I have 6 stunt points to spend on any configuration of stunts that I want on the table. For example, looking at the combat stunts table, there's one stunt worth 5 points called Lethal Blow, where I deal an additional 2d6 damage on my attack roll. And then I still have 1 stunt point to spend on one of the multiple options that are only worth 1 point. Or I could have gotten 2 of the 3 cost stunt point stunts, or 3 of the 2 points. You get what I'm saying. You can't do the same one. Like I can't do a 3 cost stunt twice on a turn. They have to be different. But talking to this game master, sometimes players can hit a bit of analysis paralysis trying to look at all the different stunts and figure out what they want to do. And once again, I haven't gotten on the table myself, but an expanded stunt system could exacerbate that problem, where now they don't only have the combat stunts table, but also the spell stunts table and their class stunts table. So not saying that that's a guaranteed thing, and I'm not knocking the system for it because it's a core part of the system, but that is some feedback I've heard from game masters in the past. Now that we've gotten the core function of the system out of the way, how you roll for ability checks and the stunt system, which is inherently tied in with that. How do you make a character? What does character creation look like for this system? So first off, it is very familiar. You're going to pick your ancestry, you're going to pick a class, you're going to pick a background, you're going to set ability scores, all very familiar. Now, there are a lot more ability scores in this system with 9 ability scores, but then rather than having skills as an entirely separate list, you have ability focuses that all fall under the umbrella of these different abilities that just show a specialization in that ability. And these all affect your modifier when you roll 3d6. If you're making an ability check, you're always rolling 3d6 and then adding a number to it, much like a d20 system. Like I said, it's very familiar and similar to a d20 system. And then in terms of ancestries, they have some really fun options like the Drac, which to me are blending of Dragonborn and Kobolds. You have the standard elf, human, dwarf, gnome, etc. The mixed ancestry option that they have, it's just a system that they have. There is no separate half-elf ancestry, but rather you pick a dominant ancestry, and then as part of your character creation process, there are ability tables for each ancestry that has, I think, 10 options, 9 options on them. There are 9 options, and normally if I'm just playing a Drac, I would pick 2 from that table. If I want to play a half human, half Drac, let's say I decide that Drac is the dominant ancestry, so I would get all of the traditional Drac ancestry abilities and modifiers and everything, but when it came time to pick 2 from the Drac table, I would instead pick 1 from the Drac table, 1 from the human table. So a pretty simple system, and it allows you some flexibility in terms of determining your mixed ancestry. Backgrounds are interesting. They are divided up into the social class that ancestry would belong to. And then the ancestors really only you get an option between 2, and you get to pick an ability focus. So it's just how you further specialize. So backgrounds are bare bones, really simple, approachable, which I appreciate because it allows for a bit more flexibility and creativity on the player's part to say, yes, I have the apprentice background, and while yes, that gets me the ability focus intelligence research, the actual flavor text that they have in the book for apprentice doesn't apply to my character. Here's what it actually looks like. And the more elements you have mechanically with the background that's tying into it, the harder it becomes to remove the mechanics from the story being told in the book. And then classes. So this is the second point where a lot of the D&D 5th edition and Pathfinder fans might potentially bounce off, but I want to assure you don't at this point. There are only 4 classes in this game: Envoy, Rogue, Mage, and Warrior. Pretty archetypical. Envoy is a brand new class added to 2nd edition. The other 3 were in 1st edition. Envoy is your social character. If you want to be able to face somebody that's good in social situations, Envoy is the character you want to play. Now, the reason that I tell you to not bounce off of it because of only having 4 class options is because this system utilizes 2 things that allow for a greater level of customization in your character's class than something like D&D 5th edition. And that is the use of talents, which is closest thing to equate it to would be feats. If you're more familiar with those D20 systems that use the feat system, talents are very similar. They are modular abilities that you get very frequently over the course of character progression that allow you to customize the character into who you actually want them to be. And then specializations is the other big thing. Fans of the channels will know I've talked about specializations before in a previous video when I was talking about how, oh, I wish that D&D still had prestige classes or Paragon pads to like really make your character feel special. They have them here. Big update from 1st edition to 2nd edition though. In 1st edition Fantasy Age, you got your first specialization at level 4, and you had to meet all the requirements for that specialization. Now, you get your first specialization at 1st level. For example, if I'm playing a level 1 warrior, when I'm making my character, before I even roll dice at a table, I have a warrior, but then I get to pick 2 talents to further refine who my warrior is and how they are a warrior. And these are largely picking the style of fighting that I do: archery, 2-weapon fighting, shield, polearm, etc. And then I get to pick my specialization, and I could pick Berserker if I wanted to play what most would call a barbarian. Or I could pick an arcane disciple if I want to be an eldritch knight type character, a champion, a gladiator. There are a ton of specializations to pick right out of the gate for the warrior. And then every odd numbered level after that, 3, 5, 7, 9, etc., you get to advance your specialization talent. And I looked through the book, and maybe I'm just overlooking it and I can't find it, but based on my knowledge of the first edition, and I think it only makes sense that this is true, once you have completed a specialization, you can then take another specialization. However, at this point, you do have to meet the requirements for that specialization. So all the specializations have prerequisites, much like a prestige class. So you have to look at those and determine, okay, if I want to go down this path, then I need to make these choices as I'm leveling up. And one thing that I think really speaks to the design philosophy of Fantasy Age that I really like in terms of the core rules, and this is just an example, this is all throughout the system, is the defeat/dying section, or defeat/death section in the book, where they talk about what happens when a player character is defeated in combat. And so when they drop to 0 hit points, they take on one of the defeat conditions of the attacker's choosing. And for notable NPCs, I'm sure you could also, if I was a GM, I would say, okay, what condition do you want them to be in? Because you have unconscious, where they're just knocked out, they can't take actions of any kind, they can't communicate to their fellows, they can't perceive anything. Helpless, where they can't take major or minor actions, but they can take reactions to avoid damage, and they can crawl 2 yards per turn. Or lastly, dying, which is where you are unconscious and you also risk death. And they have a whole death save mechanic built in that I'm not going to give the minutia of. But I like this. I like that as the GM, I can control the circumstances with which my players find themselves in based on the circumstance. I don't have to hand wave if I have a TPK and I'm like, oh, they were just knocking you all unconscious. I can be upfront about that if that's actually the intent of these villains, of these people that they're coming into conflict with. But then you additionally have coup de grace mechanics where when a foe has the defeat condition on them, there are additional options that you can take to, like, you can attempt to capture them, you can attempt to kill them, or you can scar them, which I love. I love the idea of a villain leaving a player character something to remember them by before they make a dramatic exit after besting them in combat. And then a new addition for the Fantasy Age 2nd edition system that I believe they're pulling from the Blue Rose Age system that Green Ronin also makes, that's much more focused on that romantic fantasy style of storytelling. They brought the relationship system from that game into this one, to where you can have mechanical relationships where you earn ranks and you can earn stunt points and things like that. So I really like that. Looking at the rules, they're not cumbersome in how they provide mechanics for these. They are very much a tool that allows the facilitation of role play through mechanics as opposed to getting in the way of role playing. Then it also has a phenomenal chase scene section, how to run horror games, hazards, all that kind of stuff. The GMing section for this book is really well done. Although probably my favorite GMing system that is in this book is the Peril System, the Peril Pool. Essentially, it's a balancing mechanic where as the players continue to succeed on various things or generate stunt points or spend those stunt points on things, you add 1 point to the Peril Pool at the start of an adventure. Start the adventure at 0. When you hit 10, 20, and 30, various things happen. Now it resets each time. So once you've hit 10, a minor bad thing happens and it resets to 0. When you get up to 20, moderate bad thing happens, then it goes back to 0. Once you get 30, major bad thing happens. The reason I like this is it very much evokes those moments in fun, adventuring stories where the heroes have overcome an obstacle, they wipe their feet, and they're like, oh, glad we're past that, as a horrifying thing is manifesting behind them. It has that push and pull of good storytelling, and I really like those type of mechanics in my games. Not just on the GMing side, on the player side. I like having unexpected obstacles thrown my way. So I really like the Peril Pool system, and it's also fun to say. And you also have the inverse of the Daring Pool, where as things go poorly for the players, they build up the ability to do dramatic and daring things. There is also the Fortune system, which is an alternative for health points. What I really like about the Fortune system is it is a currency with which the players have the option to spend it. So you have Fortune, just like you have health points at level 1, it's the exact same amount. But rather than, so the way taking damage happens in Fantasy Age is you're wearing armor. If the damage penetrates your armor value, then you would take damage and mark that off of your health. But with Fortune, you have that number, and then you need to spend your Fortune to negate that damage on a 1-to-1 ratio. So if 2 damage gets through, I need to spend 2 of my Fortune points to make the damage purely cosmetic. They rip my clothing, they give me a small nick on the cheek, stuff like that. If I don't or can't negate all of the damage, then I get the injured condition, where I take a -1 to all checks and I'm unable to do some of the actions. But what's important is, if then I take damage again, I am wounded, where now I have a -2 on all checks, my speed is halved, and I still can't take certain actions. And I'm basically on the precipice of defeat. If I take any more damage, I go down. So this creates an interesting dynamic where perhaps I don't want to wait until I've exhausted all my Fortune points to take the injured condition. Maybe there's a massive blow that comes through, and I think, okay, I could spend all of my Fortune to negate this damage down to 0, and the next hit I'm just guaranteed to get injured. Or let's say I'm going to take 8 damage and I have 8 Fortune points. I could say, you know what? I'm going to take that damage and gain the injured condition and hold on to my 8 Fortune points so that the next hit that comes in, if it's only a 1 or a 2, I can still stave off getting wounded and then ultimately defeated. So I really like this system. It puts agency in the player's hands. And you can also spend Fortune to affect your dice rolls. So if you want to get really daring with it, you can spend the precious resource that keeps you alive to do well on checks. But what I really like about this system is you're not adding the number of Fortune points you spend to your roll. You are changing one of the face of the die to whatever value you've spent. So if I roll a 5-3-4 or 5-2-4, let's say, and I only need 8 to pass the check, in addition to my modifier, I only need to roll an 8. I could spend 2 Fortune points to change that 5 to a 2 or the 4 to a 2, whichever one's not the stunt die, and create doubles so that then I stunt and generate stunt points. So that's what you don't have to spend a bunch to succeed on a check. You can do it in a more nuanced way. Getting way in the weeds about it, I really like the Fortune system. It's a lot of fun. I know I said Peril is my favorite, but it's familiar. I don't really need to go into a whole lot of detail because I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory what the Peril pool does, whereas Fortune and Luck and how all that works requires a bit more explanation. But I do really like it. I'm just saying, don't let this undercut the fact that I do also like the Peril pool, and it's my favorite. Now, another big thing that I do want to touch on with the Fantasy Age system when it comes to spellcasting in particular, this is for new players. If you're familiar with Fantasy Age, then you're going to know what I'm saying. The magic system works quite a bit differently than in something like Pathfinder or D&D 5th edition, in that the magic that you can use are generated by talents. You take a talent in a certain school of magic. So if I were to take the Air Arcana magic talent, then I'm a novice level where I can pick 2 novice spells from the list, and I know those spells. And then once I get up to expert, then I can learn either an additional novice or an expert Air Arcana spell of my choice. And then once I've hit master level, I can then pick an additional spell, any spell of my choosing. But think about that. I can hit master level in an arcane talent, and I have 4 spells for that arcane talent that I can use. That's going to be jarring for a lot of people because we can be accustomed, if we're from a D20 system, to where I take 1 level of wizard and I have all of these spells to pick from, or 1 level of warlock and have less spells to pick from, but still more than 2 is the point I'm making, or even 4 if you take 2 magical talents at first level. Now what this does is prevents bloat for spellcasters, where you're looking at your spell list, oh my gosh, I don't even know what I need to cast in this situation, I have too many options, or feeling frustrated because you didn't prepare the right spells because you have a giant list, but you have to pick ones you're going to prepare for the day. And additionally, it is more evocative and true to fantasy stories. generally speaking, your magic users in fantasy stories aren't jack of all trades. They're trained arcane disciples, to borrow the name of the specialization, who have focused in one or two areas of magic. And whereas you can do that as an option in a system like D&D or Pathfinder, in Fantasy Age, it is built into the system that you are an expert in your field, which means you're not going to encounter enemies that can cast every spell every which way. You're also going to encounter spellcasters that are focused in their skill set. I think that it is a smart way to approach it. I think it's a much more approachable way to do it for new players, but it can be jarring for somebody that's used to having a giant spell list when they're starting out as a spellcaster, going from that to 2 or 4 spells out of the gate. But that is an update from first edition to second edition for those of you that are familiar with first edition that are paying attention. Rather than having set spells that you get at each talent level within an arcane talent, now you get a choice. There is a spell list attached with each arcane talent, and you get to pick from multiple options, which is a nice improvement. But I'm going to wrap up the review there. I could continue going on and on deeper into this book, but I feel like I've done enough to give you an idea whether or not this system seems appealing, or if you're familiar with the first edition, whether or not the second edition will be intriguing to you. I really like this book. I think it's well written. I think the design choices are very smart. And the specialization system is something that I am very much looking forward to getting to interact with as a player if anybody would run this system for me. Would you all like more Fantasy Age content? Let me know down in the comments below. I can definitely do like a rules deep dive breaking down, here's how you play Fantasy Age 2nd edition. If there's interest in it, I would love to do that. So let me know down below. And if you're interested in other tabletop role-playing game systems that might interest you and you want to check out, then check out the video right there.